Introduction to Theresa Adams. Theresa Adams had always been a woman who prided herself on her independence. At 46, she had raised her daughter Emma on her own, ever since her marriage had crumbled years ago. Life had not been easy, but it had been fulfilling. She had built a career, a home, and a steady routine, focusing on her daughter's future and her own sense of purpose. Her days were filled with the humdrum of a single mother's life: work, school runs, grocery shopping, and the occasional evening spent curled up with a book or watching TV. The idea of love had long since faded from her mind. Her heart had once been broken, and she had no desire to open it again. She believed love was for the young, for those who still had the energy and hope to believe in fairy tales. But life, as it often does, has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Theresa had joined a support group for single parents on a quiet Tuesday evening, unsure of what to expect. A friend had suggested it, and Theresa had figured it couldn't hurt. After all, talking to people who understood the challenges of raising a child alone could only be beneficial, right? She had no idea that this group would be the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one that she never thought was possible. It was in that group that she first met Daniel Miller. He was sitting across from her, his quiet presence a stark contrast to the other more talkative members. His graying hair and gentle eyes gave him an air of wisdom, but there was something vulnerable about him too. He didn't try to impress anyone or offer unsolicited advice. He simply listened. And when he did speak, his words were kind and understanding. Theresa had been struck by how different he was from anyone she had met in years. He wasn't pushy, he didn't try to solve her problems, and he certainly wasn't looking for anything more than companionship, the way some men might. She had never believed in love at first sight, at least not for her, but there was something in the way he spoke, something in the way he looked at her, that made her wonder if perhaps she had been wrong about herself. She had locked away the idea of romance, convinced that it was something that belonged to her younger, more naive self. But Daniel's gentle nature was a reminder of the tenderness that had been missing from her life for so long. Theresa didn't know what to make of it. She wasn't looking for a relationship. She hadn't even considered that she might be ready for one. But as the weeks passed, she found herself looking forward to those meetings, finding comfort in Daniel's quiet presence, in the simple conversations they shared over coffee after the group. For the first time in years, Theresa felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. And with it, a fear she hadn't anticipated, the fear of opening her heart again. Could she really take the risk of loving someone? Could she allow herself to feel again, after so much time spent guarding her emotions? As Theresa pondered these questions, she couldn't help but notice the way Daniel's eyes would soften when they spoke, how he never rushed her, never pushed her to share more than she was comfortable with. And for the first time in ages, Theresa felt something that surprised her, the faintest whisper in her heart, saying maybe, just maybe, love wasn't beyond her reach after all. Theresa had never been one to openly share her feelings, especially with strangers. But there was something about Daniel that made it easier. Maybe it was the quiet way he listened, or the understanding in his eyes that never judged. Whatever it was, she felt drawn to him in a way she hadn't expected. Their meetings continued in the same easy rhythm. After the support group ended each week, Daniel would linger by the door, waiting for her to finish chatting with a few other parents. It was during these moments, these small exchanges, that Theresa began to realize just how much they had in common. Daniel wasn't a man who wore his past on his sleeve. He had a calm, almost reserved nature, but when he spoke, his words were thoughtful, measured. His story mirrored hers in many ways: a failed marriage, the deep ache of loss, the struggles of single parenthood. He had been trying to piece his life back together, just as Theresa had been. One evening, as they sat in the cafe next to the community center, their conversation turned to the subject of their children. Theresa spoke of Emma with a quiet pride, sharing stories of her daughter's achievements, her love for reading, the way she had recently taken an interest in music. Daniel listened intently, nodding with genuine interest. In return, he talked about his son Matthew, who was now in college. Daniel's voice softened when he mentioned Matthew, a mixture of pride and sadness in his tone. He had missed so much of his son's childhood, lost in the aftermath of his divorce. "I never realized how much I missed until it was too late," Daniel said quietly, swirling his coffee in his cup. Theresa could relate more than she cared to admit. The ache of time lost, the feeling of not being enough, the overwhelming weight of responsibility, it was something they both knew all too well. "I understand," she replied, her voice low. "It's the same with Emma. You try your best, but sometimes you feel like you're failing. Like you're not doing enough. Daniel smiled at her, a small warm smile that seemed to reach into her heart. You're doing more than enough. It's easy to forget that sometimes. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, each lost in their own thoughts. For the first time in a long while, Theresa felt a sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't about grand gestures or romantic proclamations, it was simply the comfort of being seen, of having someone understand her struggles without needing to fix them. As the weeks went by, their conversations grew deeper. They started talking about their hopes and fears, their regrets and dreams. Theresa was surprised by how much she was willing to open up to Daniel. She had never been this vulnerable with anyone, not since her divorce. Yet with Daniel, it felt natural, as if the walls she had built around her heart were slowly crumbling. It wasn't just the deep conversations that drew Theresa to him. There were the small things, the way Daniel would smile when he saw her, the way he remembered the little details about her life. He knew she liked her coffee with just a splash of cream, and he never failed to ask about Emma, always eager to hear how she was doing. One evening, after a particularly long and exhausting day, Theresa found herself sitting at her kitchen table, scrolling through her phone absent-mindedly. She had just finished putting Emma to bed and was looking for something to distract her from the thoughts swirling in her head. Her fingers hovered over Daniel's name in her contacts list. The idea of texting him, just to say hello, felt strange. After all, they were friends, weren't they? But something about it felt like crossing an invisible line. What was she expecting? A response? A smiley face emoji? A sign that he felt the same way? She shook her head and put the phone down, feeling a wave of uncertainty wash over her. Was she ready to let someone back into her life? Into her heart? But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Theresa couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. It wasn't a grand revelation or a rush of emotion, it was something quieter, more subtle. It was the realization that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had thought. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to entertain the thought that maybe love wasn't as impossible as she had once believed. The following week, when she saw Daniel after the meeting, he greeted her with his usual warm smile. But this time, something felt different. The air between them seemed charged with a quiet energy, as if they both knew something had shifted. So what's next for you? Daniel asked, leaning casually against the doorframe as they spoke. Any exciting plans for the weekend? Theresa smiled, her heart beating a little faster. I was thinking about taking Emma to the museum. It's been a while since we did something just the two of us. Daniel nodded. That sounds nice. You know, I think Matthew would love it too. Maybe I'll take him this weekend. It's always good to have a little adventure. Theresa's heart fluttered. The idea of spending time with Daniel and his son felt like another step closer to something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in for a long time. And despite her initial hesitation, despite her fear of getting hurt again, she couldn't deny that the idea of opening her heart, of taking that first step into the unknown, was becoming more and more appealing. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and Theresa could feel her heart whispering, urging her to listen. To trust. To let love in. Theresa stood by the window of her living room, watching the rain streak down the glass. It had been a week since their last conversation, and she still couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had shifted in her heart. The uncertainty was still there. Would opening herself up to someone else lead to more heartache, or would it finally be the chance for something real? She wasn't sure, but she did know one thing. The thought of Daniel lingered in her mind longer than she wanted it to. It wasn't like her to dwell on things. She was practical, grounded in the reality of her life. But Daniel, with his quiet understanding and his patient demeanor, had slipped into her thoughts in a way she hadn't expected. He wasn't like the other men she had known. There was no rush, no pressure, just a steady, comforting presence. That evening, as she was preparing dinner for Emma, her phone buzzed on the counter. Theresa glanced at it, her heart giving a small skip. It was a message from Daniel. Daniel. Hey Theresa, I hope your day's been good. I was thinking about you and Emma. If you're free this weekend, maybe we could all do something together? Matthew mentioned he'd like to visit the museum too. Theresa smiled softly, her fingers hovering over the screen. It wasn't a grand gesture, just an invitation to spend time together. But something about it felt right. She had spent so much time closed off, so much time protecting herself, that the idea of taking a simple step forward felt both exciting and terrifying. She quickly typed a reply. Theresa. That sounds great. Emma and I would love to join you. Let's plan for Saturday morning. A few seconds later, Daniel's response popped up. Daniel. Saturday morning it is. Looking forward to it. Theresa set the phone down, her heart beating faster than usual. The thought of spending time with Daniel, with Matthew, and watching Emma interact with them, felt like something more than just a casual outing. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was an undeniable connection forming between them. The question that remained, however, was whether she could truly allow herself to trust it. Saturday arrived, and Theresa spent the morning getting Emma ready for the museum. She could tell that her daughter was excited. Emma always loved these little outings, but there was also a quiet sense of anticipation in the air. Theresa couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another trip to a museum. It felt like a moment of choice, a small but significant step forward in her own life. They arrived at the museum, and as they stepped out of the car, Theresa noticed Daniel waiting by the entrance with Matthew. He looked relaxed, wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans, his hands in his pockets. Matthew, a young man in his early 20s, was beside him, his expression one of quiet curiosity. Theresa waved, and Daniel greeted her with that familiar warm smile. Hey, glad you could make it, he said, his voice calm and steady. Emma, ever the social butterfly, dashed forward to greet Matthew. Hi. I'm Emma, she said with an enthusiastic wave, and Matthew smiled warmly in return. I'm Matthew. Nice to meet you, Emma. Theresa felt a moment of relief as she watched Emma and Matthew get along so easily. It was important for her that Emma felt comfortable with the people in her life, and she could see the ease in her daughter's manner that reassured her. Daniel and Theresa exchanged a brief look, a silent understanding passing between them. The morning was shaping up to be exactly what they both needed, simple, no expectations, just the quiet joy of companionship. As they walked into the museum, the exhibit hall stretched out before them, full of vibrant colors and intriguing artifacts. Emma ran ahead, already caught up in the excitement, while Theresa and Daniel lingered behind, walking side by side. For a while, they simply enjoyed the exhibit, pointing out interesting pieces and discussing the history behind them. Daniel was knowledgeable, which didn't surprise Theresa. There was always a quiet intelligence about him, something that made her feel both comfortable and intrigued. As they moved to a new section of the museum, Daniel paused and turned to her, his gaze soft. I'm glad you came today, he said, his voice low and sincere. I know you've been through a lot, and I want you to know that I'm not rushing you. I just enjoy spending time with you. Theresa's breath caught in her throat. The words felt like a small but significant gift, the kind of acknowledgement she hadn't realized she needed until now. For the first time in years, someone was giving her space, allowing her to take her time. Thank you, she replied, her voice soft. I enjoy it too. It's just been a while since I let myself just enjoy something like this. There was a pause, and then Daniel smiled. No pressure. Just two people enjoying each other's company. Theresa's heart stirred at his words. She could feel the truth of them, the absence of urgency, the space to breathe. In the years after her divorce, she had learned to live in the moment, focusing solely on Emma and the life they had built together. But Daniel's gentle presence was beginning to remind her of something she had long forgotten, what it felt like to be seen, truly seen, by someone who didn't want anything from her but her company. As the afternoon passed, Theresa found herself more at ease than she had expected. She wasn't thinking about the past or the future, she was simply present. The laughter of Emma and Matthew, the casual conversations with Daniel, the warmth of the museum's sunlight pouring through the windows, it all came together in a quiet, beautiful moment. Later, as they sat at a cafe for a quick snack, Daniel looked over at her. I hope we can do this again sometime, he said casually, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made Theresa's heart flutter. I'd like that, she replied, her voice steady but soft. For a brief moment, their gazes met, and in that silence, Theresa felt something shift again, a deeper connection, a recognition that she was not alone, that she had someone she could trust, someone who wanted to be there. Theresa sat at her kitchen table, a half-drunk cup of coffee in front of her. The morning light filtered in through the window, casting a soft glow over the room, but Theresa hardly noticed. Her mind was far away, lost in thought. She had spent the last few days replaying the moments from the museum trip over and over in her head. She had hoped that spending time with Daniel would clarify things for her, but but instead, it had only left her feeling more conflicted. She wasn't used to feeling this way. For years, her life had been about routine, responsibility, and protecting Emma from the uncertainty that life had handed her. There had been no space for the kind of vulnerability that came with opening her heart to someone else. And yet, every time she thought about Daniel, she felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a soft pull towards something she couldn't quite define. She looked down at her phone, where Daniel's name appeared on the screen. He had texted her the night before, asking if she'd like to grab coffee sometime this week. Theresa had hesitated before replying. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to see him again, to feel that easy connection between them, but something held her back. Something she couldn't quite name. Was she ready to take this step? Was she ready to let someone back into her life, especially after everything that had happened? A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Theresa stood, surprised. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, she was met with the sight of Emma standing on the porch, holding a letter in her hands. "Mom," Emma said, her voice slightly hesitant, "this came for you." "It's from Dad." Theresa froze. The mention of her ex-husband was always a jolt to her system. It had been years since they'd been in regular contact, and even though they had worked out a system for co-parenting, it always left her unsettled when anything related to him appeared in her life. She took the letter from Emma, feeling the weight of it in her hands. "Thank you, sweetheart," Theresa said softly, closing the door behind her. She stood there for a moment, unsure of whether she should open it. But she knew she had to. It wasn't something she could avoid forever. Sitting down at the kitchen table, Theresa carefully tore open the envelope. The letter inside was brief, a simple note written in her ex-husband's familiar scrawl. "Theresa, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been thinking a lot about the past lately and felt the need to reach out. I know we haven't spoken much since the divorce, but I wanted to let you know that I've been doing some reflecting. I've changed, and I want to do better for Emma. I hope we can talk soon for her sake. Take care, John." Theresa stared at the letter for a long time, her chest tight. She didn't know what to feel. She had spent years moving forward, rebuilding her life, and now it felt like the past was suddenly crashing into her present. John's words were polite, even remorseful, but they didn't change the fact that his absence had shaped Emma's life in ways that couldn't be erased by a few kind words on paper. She folded the letter and set it aside, the old ache in her chest resurfacing. The last thing she wanted was to be pulled back into that chapter of her life, to relive the hurt and disappointment of her marriage. And yet, she knew she had to address this. For Emma's sake, and for her own. Later that evening, as Theresa sat down to a quiet dinner with Emma, her daughter was unusually quiet. Theresa noticed it immediately. Emma was usually chatty, especially when she was excited about something, but tonight, she seemed distracted. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Theresa asked, setting down her fork and looking at her daughter. Emma shrugged, pushing her food around on her plate. "I don't know. It's just Dad's letter." She looked up at Theresa, her expression serious. "Are you going to talk to him?" Theresa took a deep breath, unsure of how to answer. She had never really discussed her ex-husband with Emma. She had always tried to shield her from the complexities of their past. But now with this letter, it seemed unavoidable. "I don't know, Emma," Theresa replied softly. "I've been thinking about it. It's complicated." Emma nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "Do you think he's really changed?" Theresa smiled softly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I don't know. People can change, but that doesn't always mean they can fix everything. And sometimes, even if they change, it doesn't make things easier." Emma bit her lip, clearly processing the weight of her mother's words. "I guess. I just want him to be there. For both of us. Not just sometimes, but really be there." Theresa reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand in hers. "I know, sweetie. I know. And I'll always be here for you, no matter what." They sat in silence for a while, and Theresa realized just how much Emma had grown. She was no longer the little girl who relied on her mother for everything. She was starting to understand the complexities of the world, of relationships, and the imperfections of life. That night, as Theresa lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the letter, about Emma's words, and about Daniel. There was a part of her that wanted to keep her heart closed off, to stay in her comfort zone, to not risk anything. But another part of her, something deeper, was urging her to take a chance. She had spent so many years focusing on what she had lost that she had forgotten to look at what she might gain. The past was behind her, and though it had shaped her, it didn't have to dictate her future. The question was no longer whether she could trust someone again. It was whether she was ready to embrace the possibility of love once more, to open her heart to the unexpected, to the things that couldn't be planned or controlled. As she drifted to sleep, the image of Daniel's smile filled her mind, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe in something more. The days following the arrival of John's letter felt heavy for Theresa, as though the weight of the past had returned in a way she wasn't ready to face. She had spent so much time building her life without him, without the complications of their failed marriage, that the thought of confronting him again, emotionally and physically, felt like stepping into a storm. But Emma's quiet question the night of the letter still echoed in her mind. "Are you going to talk to him?" It was a question that felt simple but was filled with so much meaning. Emma had always been a perceptive child, able to pick up on emotions even when they weren't spoken aloud. She wanted her father back in her life, wanted that sense of family, even if she didn't fully understand what that might entail. Theresa had promised to always be there for Emma, but she had never anticipated that part of keeping that promise would mean confronting her past, her ex-husband, head-on. She didn't know if she could do it. Part of her wanted to protect Emma from the hurt she had experienced, but another part, a smaller part, wondered if some closure with John would be good for them both. Theresa had spent the better part of the week distracted, but now, standing in the kitchen one morning, as she was preparing breakfast for Emma, the phone rang. She picked it up without checking the caller ID, knowing it was likely just another telemarketer. But to her surprise, it was John. "Theresa," his voice was careful, hesitant. "I know this might be a bit unexpected, but I've been thinking a lot about what I wrote in that letter. I'd really like to talk. I understand if you're not ready, but if you are, I think it might be good for Emma." Theresa's heart pounded as she gripped the phone tighter. Her mouth went dry, and she could feel her pulse quicken. "John," she began, her voice shaky but firm. "I don't know if I'm ready to have this conversation. We've been apart for years, and I don't know what there is left to say." "I know," John said quietly. "I know it's been a long time. But I can't ignore the fact that Emma's growing up, and I've missed so much of it. I want to do better. For her. For both of you." Theresa closed her eyes, feeling the familiar pang of old wounds reopening. There had been so many promises, so many moments where she had trusted John, and so many times he had let her down. She wasn't sure if she could believe him again, but there was one thing she was sure of: Emma deserved to know her father, even if it was difficult for her to face the past. "Okay," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "We can talk. But it's going to take time, John. A lot has changed." "I understand. I'll be patient," he replied. "Thank you for this. I promise I won't push." That afternoon, after Emma had left for a playdate with one of her friends, Theresa sat in her living room, trying to organize her thoughts. She knew this conversation with John wouldn't be easy, but she couldn't keep avoiding it. It wasn't just about the past, it was about Emma's future, and Theresa couldn't shield her from everything forever. But it didn't make the thought of seeing John any easier. Just as she was lost in her thoughts, the phone buzzed again. It was a message from Daniel. "Daniel. Hey Theresa. I was thinking about you today. I know things have been a little complicated lately, but I just wanted to check in. If you ever need to talk or just want some company, I'm here. No pressure, just wanted you to know." Theresa smiled softly as she read the message. There was something about Daniel's kindness, his ability to give her space without pushing, that made her feel seen. He had no idea about the letter or her conversation with John, but his message felt like a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone in this. "Theresa. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it more than you know. It's been a tough week, but I'm hanging in there." She sat for a moment, reading the message again, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude for his presence in her life. While the past loomed large, the present, with its quiet moments and steady support from Daniel, felt like a small oasis. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe there was still room for something good, something real. The following weekend, John arrived at Theresa's house for their conversation. He was early, standing in the driveway, pacing nervously as he waited for the door to open. When Theresa stepped outside, she was taken aback by how much he had changed. He looked older, his hair more gray than she remembered, and the years seemed to have weighed heavily on him. There was an air of regret about him, a quiet sadness in his eyes. "Theresa," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly as he reached out to shake her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Theresa hesitated for a moment before extending her hand, giving him a quick, formal handshake. "Let's sit down," she said, her tone distant but not unkind. She led him into the living room, where they both sat down across from one another, the space between them still charged with old tensions. There was an uncomfortable silence for a moment, and then John spoke again. "I've thought about this conversation for so long," he began. "And I know I've hurt you, and I can't undo the past, but I want you to know that I've changed. I've worked on myself. I'm trying to be a better man, a better father." Theresa listened, her arms crossed in front of her. She wasn't sure how much she believed him, but she could see the sincerity in his eyes. This wasn't the man she had once been married to, the man who had lied to her, neglected her. This was a man who had been through his own struggles and for the first time, seemed truly remorseful. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Theresa finally said, her voice steady but firm. "But Emma deserves to have both of her parents in her life, and that's what matters now. For her sake, I'm willing to try to make this work. But it's going to take time. And I can't promise that things will ever be the way they were." John nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I understand. I'm just grateful you're giving me a chance to try." That evening, after John left, Theresa sat in the quiet of her home, reflecting on the conversation. It hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. For the first time in years, she felt like she was finally facing the ghosts of her past, not to revisit the pain, but to allow herself to heal. And in doing so, she had taken another step forward. Later that night, as she was about to go to bed, she received another text from Daniel. "Daniel, I'm glad you're doing what feels right for you, Theresa. Just remember, no matter what happens, you're not alone." Theresa smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. There was something deeply comforting in Daniel's words, something that reminded her that, even though her past was messy and complicated, she didn't have to navigate the future alone. The weeks after Theresa's meeting with John were filled with an uneasy sense of change. There were moments when she felt lighter, as if unburdening herself of the past had allowed her to breathe more easily. But there were also days when the weight of everything still pressed down on her, like when Emma would ask her about seeing her father, or when she would catch herself remembering old arguments, old wounds that hadn't fully healed. But the hardest part was learning how to navigate this new space between the past and the present. John was making an effort, albeit a small one. He had called a few times, and he and Emma had spent a few afternoons together, but Theresa could tell Emma still had reservations. She wanted her father in her life, but the cracks in their relationship were still too fresh, too raw to ignore. Theresa could see it in the way Emma hesitated when John picked her up, the way her eyes would flicker with uncertainty. Theresa couldn't blame her. She was still trying to figure it all out herself. And yet, something in her had changed. For the first time, she wasn't holding on to the anger she had carried for so long. Instead, she was learning how to let go, not for John's sake, but for Emma's, for both their sakes. It was on one of those quiet evenings, when she had just finished putting Emma to bed and was preparing to settle down with a book, that her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was from Daniel. "Daniel. Hey Theresa, I know it's been a bit since we last talked, but I was thinking about you today. I hope everything's okay. I'm here if you need anything." Theresa smiled softly as she read the message. She had always appreciated how Daniel never pushed, never tried to force anything. He simply let her be, offering his support in a way that made her feel safe, but not smothered. It was a rare quality, and one that she had come to value more than she could express. "Theresa. Thank you, Daniel. Things are a bit chaotic, but I'm getting through it. I really appreciate you checking in." She stared at her phone for a moment, her heart beating a little faster than usual. It had been weeks since they had last spent time together, and though their conversations were always easy, there was a lingering feeling that she needed more. She needed to see him, to talk to him in person, not just through texts. "Theresa, would you want to grab coffee sometime soon? Maybe Saturday?" The message sent, and Theresa couldn't help but feel a flutter of anticipation. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but she had learned that some things, some connections, were worth exploring, even if they made her nervous. Saturday arrived, and Theresa found herself getting ready a little earlier than usual. It wasn't that she was trying to impress Daniel, she wasn't trying to do anything more than simply enjoy his company. But as she pulled on her jacket and checked her reflection in the mirror, she couldn't help but notice how much more she cared about how she looked. How much she cared about how he would see her. It was a new feeling, and one that both excited and unsettled her. When they met at the cafe, Daniel was already there, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up when Theresa walked in, his face lighting up with that familiar smile that always seemed to make everything feel a little brighter. "Hey you," he said warmly, standing up to greet her. "It's good to see you." Theresa smiled back, feeling an unexpected warmth flood through her. It was simple, but it was enough. "Good to see you too," she replied, sitting down across from him. "I've been meaning to reach out sooner, but it's been one of those weeks." "I understand," Daniel said, leaning back in his chair. "Life tends to pile up sometimes." They sat for a moment, both of them sipping their coffee, the silence comfortable. Theresa could feel the weight of everything that had happened over the past few weeks. Her conversations with John, the complexity of co-parenting, the uncertainty that still lingered between her and Emma, but sitting here with Daniel in the quiet of the cafe, she could almost forget it all. "How's Emma?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. "She's doing okay," Theresa said with a soft sigh. "She's been spending more time with her dad. I think she's still figuring things out though. There's a lot of uncertainty for her, and I don't know how to make that easier." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's tough. But you're doing the right thing, letting her figure it out at her own pace. She'll come around when she's ready." "I hope so," Theresa said, looking down at her cup, her fingers tracing the rim absent-mindedly. "It's just hard to know what the right thing is sometimes." "Well," Daniel said with a small smile, "there's no rulebook for this stuff. You just do your best, and that's enough." Theresa looked up at him, her heart suddenly swelling with emotion. There was something about his steady confidence, the way he spoke with such calm assurance, that made her feel like she wasn't as alone in this journey as she had once thought. "I guess that's true," she said quietly. They spent the next hour talking about everything and nothing, about work, about books, about their favorite places to visit in the city. It wasn't anything earth-shattering, but for Theresa, it was exactly what she needed. She needed to feel normal again, to feel like there was still space for joy, for laughter, for connection. As the conversation wound down, Daniel leaned forward slightly, his eyes soft. "Theresa, I know things are complicated right now, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. I'm not going anywhere." Theresa's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had always known that Daniel was a steady presence in her life, but hearing him say it out loud made her realize just how much he meant to her. He wasn't asking for anything, not rushing her, not pushing for more. He was simply offering her the comfort of knowing that she wasn't alone. "I know," she said, her voice low but steady. "And I appreciate it. More than you know." As they said goodbye outside the cafe, Daniel gave her a hug, simple, brief but warm, and Theresa couldn't help but feel like something had shifted again. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make her believe in the possibility of something new. As she walked back to her car, Theresa felt a sense of peace wash over her. The path ahead wasn't clear, and there were still many challenges to face, but she was beginning to understand that she didn't have to face them alone. With Daniel's steady support, with Emma's quiet resilience, and with the small steps she was taking every day, Theresa was learning to trust again, not just in others, but in herself. For the first time in a long time, she could see a future that wasn't defined by what had been lost, but by what was still possible. The following weeks passed in a gentle rhythm, the days blending together in a mixture of work, motherhood, and the gradual unfolding of something new with Daniel. Theresa was still navigating the complexities of her past, but she was beginning to feel more like herself again. The heaviness that had weighed her down for so long was starting to lift, and in its place was a quiet sense of hope. She had begun to see Daniel more often, and each time they spent together, whether it was over coffee, a walk in the park, or just talking late into the evening, the connection between them deepened. It wasn't rushed, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time in years, Theresa felt like she was rediscovering parts of herself that had been dormant, buried beneath the pain of her past. Emma had started to warm up to the idea of having Daniel in her life, though it wasn't without its hesitations. She was a smart, intuitive child, and she could sense the shift in her mother. It was as though Emma was watching, waiting, to see if this relationship, this bond, was something she could trust. Theresa had been open with Emma about her growing friendship with Daniel, but she had never pushed her daughter to embrace it. She knew that Emma needed time, and she respected that. As much as Theresa wanted her to accept Daniel fully, she understood that trust, in any relationship, had to be earned. She was patient, allowing things to unfold naturally. One Saturday afternoon, as they were preparing to head out to the farmer's market, Emma suddenly turned to Theresa with a question that caught her off guard. "Mom, do you like Daniel?" Emma's voice was tentative, as if testing the waters. Theresa paused, taken aback by the directness of the question. She had never really talked to Emma about her feelings for Daniel, and for a moment, she wasn't sure how to respond. I do, she said slowly, her heart beating a little faster. I like spending time with him. He's kind, and he makes me feel good about myself. Emma nodded, her brow furrowing slightly. But, you're not going to get married, are you? Theresa's heart ached at the innocence of the question. She had never wanted to confuse Emma, never wanted her daughter to feel like she was being replaced or pushed aside. The thought of marriage was still a distant one for Theresa, something she hadn't even allowed herself to imagine. The idea of opening her heart to someone again felt like a delicate, fragile thing. "No, sweetheart," Theresa said softly, kneeling down to Emma's level. "We're just getting to know each other, okay? I want you to feel comfortable with everything, and I promise, we'll take it slow." Emma's face relaxed a little, her expression thoughtful. "Okay. But if you like him, then I guess I like him too." Theresa smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you, Emma. That means a lot to me." Later that evening, Daniel called, as he usually did. He had been a constant presence in Theresa's life over the past few months, but she realized that, in many ways, they hadn't yet fully crossed the threshold into something more. They were still in the early stages, testing the waters of a new relationship, but she couldn't deny that the feelings between them were growing. "Hey, how was the farmer's market?" Daniel asked, his voice warm and easy. "It was good," Theresa replied, a smile tugging at her lips. "Emma's been asking a lot of questions lately." Daniel chuckled softly. "That's a good sign, right?" Theresa sighed, leaning back against the couch. "I think so. She's starting to accept that things are changing, but it's still a little hard for her. She's always been sensitive to how I feel." "You're doing great, Theresa. It takes time for kids to adjust to new things, but you're giving her the space she needs." Theresa smiled again, grateful for his reassurance. "I just don't want to rush her. I want her to feel secure. She's been through enough already." "You're doing the right thing," Daniel said quietly. "I admire how much you care for her. It's clear she's your world." Theresa felt a warmth spread through her at his words. It was moments like these, when Daniel spoke so kindly about Emma, that made her feel like she wasn't alone in this journey. He wasn't just offering her companionship, he was offering understanding, support, and a genuine connection. "I appreciate you being patient with her," Theresa said, her voice soft. "And with me." "You don't have to thank me," Daniel replied, his tone sincere. "I'm happy to be here. I care about you both, and I'm not going anywhere." Those words, simple yet profound, settled in Theresa's heart. For so long, she had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had done it all on her own, never allowing herself to fully rely on anyone. But with Daniel, it felt different. She wasn't just sharing her life with him, she was letting him into the spaces of her heart that she had closed off for so long. As they ended the call, Theresa felt a sense of peace. There was still a long road ahead, and she didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to walk it. The next week, Daniel invited Theresa to dinner at a small, cozy restaurant in the city. It wasn't a grand gesture, but something about it felt significant. They had been spending time together for months, but tonight, as they sat across from each other in the dimly lit restaurant, Theresa felt the weight of their growing connection in a way she hadn't before. "So," Daniel said, taking a sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving hers. "What do you think this is, Theresa? What are we doing here?" Theresa felt a flutter of nervousness, but she pushed it aside. This was a question she had been asking herself for a while, and now that it was finally being put into words, she had to answer honestly. I think we're building something," she said slowly, her gaze meeting his. "Something real. And I want to see where it goes. But I'm not rushing it. I'm still figuring out how to balance everything." Daniel's smile was warm, understanding. We're in this together. We don't have to rush. I just want to be here, and take things one step at a time. Theresa nodded, feeling a weight lift off her chest. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to fully embrace the possibility of love. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without its challenges, but it was real. And that was enough for her. As they continued their dinner, laughter and conversation flowing easily between them, Theresa realized that she wasn't just letting Daniel into her life, she was opening her heart to the possibility of a future that could be filled with love, trust, and understanding. The soft glow of the morning sun filtered through the curtains as Theresa sat at her kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand. The house was still, with only the faint hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. Emma had gone to a sleepover at a friend's house, and for the first time in weeks, Theresa had a moment to herself, a rare, precious moment of peace. It was in this quiet that she allowed herself to reflect on the changes of the past few months. So much had happened since the first time she had met Daniel in that support group for single parents. Her life had shifted in ways she hadn't expected, and now, as she sat here in the calm of the morning, she realized how much she had grown. For the first time in years, she wasn't just living for her daughter. She was living for herself, too. Her phone buzzed, breaking her reverie. It was a message from Daniel. Daniel. Good morning, Theresa. I've been thinking about you this morning, and I wanted to say thank you. For letting me into your life. For trusting me. I'm here, whenever you're ready. Her heart warmed at the words, and she couldn't help but smile. Daniel had always been steady, never rushing her, never pushing her boundaries. He had been patient with her, understanding the complexities of her life and her past, and had never once made her feel like she had to move faster than she was ready for. His simple, heartfelt message was everything she needed to hear at this moment. Theresa. Thank you, Daniel. I think I'm ready. I'm ready to let myself believe in something again. She hit send and took a slow sip of her coffee, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. The truth was, she had been holding back, still unsure, still afraid of the heartache that could come if things didn't work out. But today, for the first time, she felt the stirrings of hope. That afternoon, Daniel picked her up for a walk in the park, their usual weekend routine. The sky was clear, the air crisp with the first hints of autumn, and the colors of the leaves were starting to turn. As they walked along the path, side by side, the comfort between them was undeniable. It wasn't just about shared moments anymore, it was about a connection that had deepened and grown over time, something neither of them had anticipated but both of them now cherished. Daniel turned to her as they walked, his expression serious but warm. Theresa, I know we've talked a lot about the future, about taking things slow, but I want to make one thing clear. I'm here for you. Whatever happens, I'm not going anywhere. Theresa stopped walking for a moment, turning to face him. Her heart was racing, and she realized that, in this moment, she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't afraid of what might happen or whether it would all fall apart. She was here, fully present, ready to take the next step. I know, she said softly, her voice steady. I'm ready to trust you, Daniel. I've been holding back for a long time, but I want to believe in something again. I want to believe in us. His eyes softened as he stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. You don't have to do it alone, Theresa. We don't have to rush anything. But I promise, I'm here for the long haul. They stood there for a moment, hand in hand, the world around them fading into the background. Theresa felt a deep, quiet sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't just letting go of her past, she was opening herself up to a future she never thought she'd have, a future filled with possibilities. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch of Theresa's house, watching the sunset together, Emma came home from her sleepover. Theresa had been dreading the moment, not knowing what Emma's reaction would be to the shift in her relationship with Daniel. But when Emma stepped through the door, there was a new softness in her eyes, a quiet acceptance that had been absent before. Hey Mom, Emma said, walking up to them. She glanced at Daniel, then back at her mother. I missed you. Theresa smiled, feeling her heart swell with emotion. I missed you too, sweetheart. Emma hesitated for a moment before walking over and sitting next to Theresa. She glanced up at Daniel, and for a moment, there was silence between them. Then, slowly, Emma smiled. So, are you and Daniel going to do more fun stuff together? Like, the museum? I think it was fun. Theresa's breath caught in her throat, and she looked at Daniel, whose eyes were full of warmth and understanding. We can definitely do more fun things, Emma. If you'd like that. Emma nodded, a small shy smile on her face. Yeah, I'd like that. Theresa felt a weight lift off her shoulders. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for, the moment where the pieces of their lives began to come together. It wasn't perfect, and there would still be bumps along the way, but it was real. And that was enough. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Daniel and Theresa sat together on the couch, the quiet hum of the house filling the space between them. They didn't need to say much. The connection between them was solid, built on trust, patience, and understanding. Theresa turned to him, her voice soft. Thank you, Daniel. For being here. For being so patient with me, with Emma. You've made it easier than I thought it could be. Daniel smiled, his hand gently brushing hers. I'm just glad to be here, Theresa. To be part of your life, part of Emma's life. This is something real. Something worth building. For the first time in a long time, Theresa felt like she was standing at the edge of something beautiful, something worth investing in. She wasn't just opening herself up to Daniel, she was opening herself up to the future, one that wasn't defined by her past mistakes, but by the choices she made in the present. As they sat there together, the world outside seemed to fade away, and in its place was a quiet promise, one of love, of trust, and of hope for what was to come.